Hey there! Welcome to the What's Your Thing podcast, where we're all about great conversations with interesting people.
That's right. I'm Brennan.
And I'm Caitlin.
There's something awesome about every person, a thing that makes them truly unique.
We want to know what it is about everyone, so we're asking,
What's your thing? Welcome to episode number 13 of the What's Your Thing podcast. I am one half the host of this show. My other half.
You're Brennan, and I'm the other half, Caitlin. Welcome back. Lucky number 13. We have a really exciting guest on this show. We have, for the first time, a young adult author with multiple books published. I'm excited for the conversation. Brennan, why don't you give us the introduction?
What's Your Thing podcast, episode number 13. Again, Brennan here. We have a special guest today, a author of mid-grade fantasy novels. For those of you who aren't quite familiar with them, very popular similar books and series are among the Harry Potters and the Keepers of the Lost Cities. We have N.P. Thompson, an author of two books released, River of Crows, Mirror of Wolves, and the upcoming third book, Stone of Serpents, to be released in May of 2024. She is very well educated, has degrees in cognitive science, education, interactive media design, and is an animal lover and a mother of two. And hopefully I got it right. Please welcome to the show, N.P. Thompson, and tell us, what's your thing?
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. My thing, as you mentioned, is writing kids' books. More specifically, I write fantasy novels for that gray area in between middle grade and YA.
Amazing.
So how did you get started into this? I think of like fantasy, and I'm one of those people that I have an imagination, but I find it so hard to keep track of everything that I'm thinking of. How do you get your start in this sort of thing and kind of stay on point?
Oh boy, there's a lot in that question.
Yeah.
I was a big reader when I was a kid. I was always reading. I never went anywhere without at least one book in my bag. And it was just, I was always surrounded by books. My dad was also a really big reader, and our basement was just, he built shelves and just filled them up with books. And anytime I wanted a book, I'd be like, I need a recommendation. And he'd lead me down to his little home library and sort of recommend books for me. So I've always been reading. And I think a lot of people have this sort of, because I've heard it a lot from people, you know what, I always wanted to write a book. And I was like that too. I actually got my start in nonfiction, and my very first book was a nonfiction book. And I remember I met a friend at Toastmasters, and that's how we became friends. And he has a number of books in the nonfiction genre, and some of them are on the New York Times list. And he was talking about one of his books one day, and I remember talking to him after the Toastmasters sessions, just mentioning that, I've always thought about writing a book. And he looked at me and he said, so do it. And I just sort of blinked and sort of went, oh, okay. So I went out and did it. And I remember he took that book in one of our Toastmaster sessions afterwards, after I'd written it, and he held it up in front of the entire group. And I was so embarrassed, but I was so proud at the same time. And he said, I cannot tell you the number of people who have come up to me and told me that they want to write a book. And he said, I have taken time to speak with every single one of them. She's the only one who's done it. And I wrote a bunch of nonfiction stuff. And then when my son was young, he was about 6 years old, and he was reading many grade levels above his grade level. So I think he was in grade 1, and he was reading at like a grade 6 or 7 level.
Oh my goodness.
And it was so hard for me to find books that he wanted to read, because he was so far advanced for that sort of age category, but also he was still a 6-year-old kid. And trying to find books that were both sort of age and developmentally appropriate, but were also challenging and interesting for him, was actually really hard for me. I remember walking into bookstores and just like, help. And I think my desire to write fantasy novels came out of sort of that period of my life, was just wanting to write the books that I wished were available when my kids were tiny.
So did you find with that, like just having like immersed yourself in so many books since you were younger and then having previously written nonfiction, did it come kind of like the process come easy to you, or just the fact that you're in fantasy and there's so much that you can do with it? Did you find it challenging to kind of write
It's
what
very
you
different from writing nonfiction. I'll go with that to start with.
Yeah.
But just the way my brain works, I think I'm fairly methodical about the way I write. I do start with an outline. I know what's going to happen, and this was always going to be a series. From the very first book, it was going to be a series, and I knew that. I had originally planned on a trilogy, and I got through and plotted out sort of what was going to happen in the first 3 books, and I got to the end of that plotting, and I was like, there's a couple of really critical things that haven't been solved yet, so I guess we're writing more.
That would be the next question. Sorry, if I could go to like what led you to finding this particular style, like these books, if you can tell us a little bit about them, the so far trilogy and going on to 4.
The inspiration for this whole series was, I don't know, you guys are in Ottawa as well, so I don't know if you've ever actually looked up at around this time of year, in the spring and in the fall. You can see them from pretty much everywhere in the city, but there's crows, and you can see them, they flow in a line across the sky in the spring and the fall. And there were articles about this group of crows in this city many years ago. I remember reading them. There's about 60,000 of them nesting up near the General Hospital. And every spring and every fall, when it's not nesting season for baby crows, they huddle together in a group. So they go and they roost in this area near the General Hospital every night for, warmth and safety. And then every morning they flow out to every part of the city, and it's just lines of crows. You can watch them, and they're flowing. It looks just like a river, a black river flowing through the sky. And so many people have absolutely no idea that happens, but I have always just been fascinated by them. And I'll just drop what I'm doing just to watch them. I'll be out shoveling my driveway, and I'm just like, oh, the crows are out. So they were, I always thought of them as a river, just because it's so organic. They're flowing and they're waving and they're moving. I have a friend who calls them a crow pipeline, but they never really struck me as a pipeline. That's too rigid and mechanical. It was a crow river. It's always been a river of crows to me. And that phrase, river of crows, was what set off my whole writing journey. It just got stuck in my head, and I just knew this would make such a great title for a book. And this concept of, how could I work that into a book? How could these crows become a story?
That's really, really cool that you found your inspiration. So building on that, you have this amazing idea based on something that you can see and have this reaction to. So can you tell us just a little bit about the world and where you built from that idea of this river?
The world in my stories?
Yes.
So the first book, it starts off, they're here, and in our world. And the world is the city that these kids are in is called the main character anyway. He's in a city called New Haven, and it's loosely based on Ottawa. It's he's in a suburb of Ottawa basically, but it's New Haven, not Ottawa. And he has this crow that he's noticed that's in the neighborhood. It's a crow that has a one white feather. And he's just fascinated by this crow, and he really wants to make friends with it. So he starts researching crows and learning about them. And he learns that they can recognize different human faces, and they're smart, and they can use tools, and they can actually build friendships with people. So he starts trying to feed it and make friends with this crow. And then his crow friend, he gets hurt. So he gets into this situation where he sees this weird girl from school. And she's like a weird kid, and nobody really wants to sort of be around her because she's always talking about magic, and nobody believes in magic, but she's obsessed with it. So they all just kind of leave her alone. And he comes across her trying to save this group of crows from the school bully who's whipping rocks at this crow. And then he realizes that this crow she's defending is his friend that he calls Streak because of the white feather on him. So that sort of sends them into this adventure where they decide they have to get this crow back to his family. And well, obviously they have to follow the river of crows to go back to the roost, because the crows will actually look after an injured member of their own flock. They'll feed them and take care of them until they're able to fly again. So they go, and then as they get to this roost, they suddenly discover that there's more to this roost than they had previously understood, because they follow Streak into a little forest that's at the back of this field where all these crows are, and they find that a portal gets opened and they get sucked through into this magical world. And that sends them off on a whole new adventure, because Ty finds out that this girl, she believes in magic for a reason. She's not actually from around here. So then he starts learning all this stuff about her and how he sort of misjudged her. And they sort of meet a whole bunch of new friends on their journey, because she has been looking for a portal because her brother's been kidnapped by crows. And Ty doesn't understand, the character doesn't understand how can they're crows, they can't kidnap somebody. And she gets very upset because she knows what she saw. And so she's off trying to find her brother, because she knows her brother's been taken back to this magical world that she's a refugee from many years ago. She and her mother came from this strange place. And there now she's determined to find a brother. So Ty's going to try and help her find her brother, because she's the only one who can possibly get him home. And chaos and mayhem and lots of magic ensues.
So is that like the synopsis of book one? Or is that just kind of carrying in?
That's book one.
Oh, because I was going to say, when you look at that,
the start of book one.
That's the start of book one, and you've got one coming out, and you said this could lead to 4, maybe 5 in a series. So how you start with an idea, you write a book, you moved from book 1 to book 2, you move from book 2 to what's coming book. How does your perspective change from the start, from what your thought process was going to be? Then you have your editing period piece. Is there a point where you're like, I know this is going to work, and then maybe somebody who's reading over is like, you should probably change this, and like the whole story shifts? How's your whole thing changed from what day one you thought was going to be to expanded universe book 4, 3?
So what I always tell people when they ask me about writing advice is the first draft is always for yourself. Nobody should ever see that first draft except you. It's basically just you telling the story to yourself. You're just trying to get all those ideas out there, get them down so that you can work with them. So a lot of people, especially when you're talking to kids, they sort of figure you just write a story and it's done.
Yeah.
Explaining to them that's
like
just the first step. You have to get the story written, and then the real magic, literary magic, happens in the revising and the editing stages. And that part, it's the most important part, I think, when it comes to writing. And there's you've got writers in two camps sort of with this. Some people absolutely hate revising and editing. They loathe it. They love the initial story part, but they absolutely hate having to work with it after. I'm in the opposite camp. I find the first stage, getting the story out, is the longest and the hardest stage for me.
So is it still your same person that kind of got you into writing that would help you with your editing, or do you have a team?
No, I have an editor. I have a professional editor I hire who once I've worked with all my stuff and I'm happy with the manuscript, and that's there's a lot of revising and self-editing that happens before it gets to the stage where it goes to the editor.
Is it ever frustrating where you're just they're like, you got to take this out, you got to do this, and you're just like, no, I wanted that, and then it works out in the end because you're like, okay, I get it.
In the first book, there were a few things we sort of had some discussions about, because especially when you know that you're writing a series and you have sort of things that are planned, so you're putting your little Easter eggs in. It's like, no, I can't take that out because
yeah. So that's, I guess, where we're gonna go next, is for the future of this series, and then whatever else. I'm sure if you're a writer, you're probably going to expand onto that. Do you kind of know where this is going to end, but you're kind of filling it in as you go along? Or is it just your plan of 3 books turned into 4 because you've got a little bit more to say and you kind of know that?
Oh no, it's a lot more than 4. At this point, this is probably going to be sort of about 8 or 9 books.
Oh, nice. So you I always loved the Vampire Chronicles, and I went through the first couple books, and it was like, okay, I can keep them coming, keep them coming. So that's great. Do you have that
Yeah,
in your
when you
head?
find
Like,
a series you really like, it's like, ooh, don't stop it.
yeah. Well, my wife's big into the Outlander series. She's like, just hopes the books keep coming. But yeah. Do you kind of see, even though it's 9 books, where it's going to end, or do you think you're
Oh yeah,
open to changing?
yeah. No, it's so you get this sort of plotting versus pantsing thing where people sort of, some writers just, they don't go in with any plan at all. It's just my muse, she'll tell me where I'm going.
That
I
gives
love
me such
people who can do
anxiety.
that. I cannot do that. I need to know. I had just the way my brain works. I need to have a logical sort of, these are the things I want to happen. This is sort of my arch, my story arch for the entire series. This is sort of the story arch for these few books, then these few books. So this is actually going to be sort of 3 sets of 3, basically. So there's sort of the overarching storyline for the entire series. Then I've got sort of arches for sets of 3, and then there's the smaller arch for the specific book. And all of those have to sort of tie together. And so I kind of need to have some idea of what's going to be happening, because it's such a complicated and sort of a long-term project that way. But once I start writing, like, even though I do have an outline and I know generally what's going to happen, there's always room for things to sort of shift and change as I'm writing, because you'll sort of get more ideas as you're going that you hadn't really sort of considered before. And sometimes, like, these characters, I can't really speak for other authors, but like my characters, they just sort of come into my head, and I sort of, sometimes they sort of take me on new directions. I was like, this is what I planned for you. No, I'm going this way.
That's
Okay,
kind
then.
of what I wanted to just follow up with. Like, where do you draw your inspiration for characters? Do you have your, your protagonists and your antagonists, but do you just kind of look down or at your family or on the road? You're like, oh, that kind of person, I can work that kind of personality into my story.
Um, for specific characters, it's yes and no. Like, I don't sort of start off thinking I'm going to write a character that's like this.
Okay.
But what I do sometimes have is, when I'm writing a character, I sometimes have like an actor in a particular role, sort of how the sort of speech patterns were being interrupted by my very yowly cat. So I will have sort of speech patterns and accents and stuff in my head as I'm writing. Like the first book, there's a sort of a helper character that the kids encounter, and his name is Archimedes. And he has in my head, when I was writing him, I totally had David Tennant in my head, but not David Tennant as he is now. It's David Tennant as like a really old man with like a long gray beard, but channeling his manic Doctor Who energy. And that whole character is sort of built around that sort of that, I don't know, construct in my head.
Yeah.
So yes and no.
So
There's a character in the second book, actually. I had, I don't know if you know who Jane Carr is.
Yep.
Yeah, Jane Carr is awesome. I love Jane Carr. When
Yeah.
I get old, I want to be just like Jane Carr. But Betty White was also my other sort of, when I get older, that will be how I will be. But
I feel like Betty White's
Jane
everybody's
Carr,
favorite.
what's that?
I think
She's
Betty White's
everyone's
like the
favorite.
person on the planet that everybody loved,
Yeah.
regardless.
Yeah. But Jane Carr has a very distinct way of speaking. She's got a much higher pitched voice, and she's got the characters that I've seen her play have been sort of very sort of sharp, and that was kind of sort of the personality that I had for another character in who shows up in book 2. He's a professor. So I do have some sort of influence that way, but I don't sort of specifically decide I'm going to write a character and they're going to be this. They just sort of show up in my head, and they just sort of get molded, I guess, by.
So it's really cool that you saw like a gap of what was needed for young readers and you decided to fill it. Since you've been writing, now that you're, into publishing book 3, has the publishing world changed? Is this kind of like a demographic that people are writing more for?
Boy. Middle grade is actually I think it's a really rough area to be in right now. It's There's so much happening in the middle grade world these days. Like a lot of the book awards that used to be there specifically for middle grade have just disappeared. Even Goodreads this year didn't even do their Goodreads choice for middle grade anymore. It's not even a category. And a bunch of the bigger ones too they're just gone. So it's hard, I think, for middle grade writers to get the word out about their books. It's just
Is that just a demographic not reading books anymore, more focused on like the social medias and stuff like that? Or because we're not far removed from even like the Hunger Games and stuff like that.
The thing is I don't think that authors really get much of a say in sort of what happens along those lines. I think in a lot of ways, I think trends get set at the publisher ends of things. So they're decided, this is what we're going to do. And if it doesn't fit that trend, they're not going to push it, So, and the publishing industry in general is very trend-based, I find. So you're going to find a lot of right now, it's huge in graphic novels. That will fade, and then it'll be something else, and then it'll be something else.
So a question along the lines of trends, and so many middle schoolers right now are on social media. Is a social media presence, is that necessary to companion these books right now and get them out there?
That's another issue. You asked how the industry's changed. Twitter was the sort of big site for the writing set. Everybody was on Twitter. And then Twitter crashed and burned. And the writers are leaving in droves, and it's scattered right now. So I think that's one of the things that's made a lot of us writers sad, because like our people were over on Twitter and now they're just gone. They're everywhere and nobody really knows where anybody is right now. So I still see a lot of people on Instagram. I think book talk is really big, but I'm not on TikTok, so I have no interest in doing video. I'm very camera shy, so like this is actually really hard for me. But yes, I'm really sorry about my cat. She's very, very loud.
Oh, have you not heard mine?
No,
like,
I haven't.
Going crazy. She's been chewing around everything.
Maybe they're hearing
comes
each
and says
other
hi.
talking to each other.
Yeah, they can sense. They're like, hey, what's going on?
Maybe. So the social media, I'm on Instagram and I'm on Blue Sky, but for the middle grade crowd, they're not the ones who are buying the books, right? So you're not really directly reaching kids, just in general. So I don't really know how important the social media is right now. And I think that whole area is kind of in flux right now as everybody's trying to figure out what the next big thing is going to be. And it's also very, very time consuming. So I think most of us are just like, okay, just pick a couple and hope for the best. Because I mean, at the end of the day, one of the things that most people do not understand about writers is people hear you've written a book and everybody assumes you're rolling in it, like rolling, right? They assume you've got like Stephen King or J.K. Rowling levels of money. Everybody assumes this when they hear that you're a writer. That is not the case. Most writers, most of us have at least one day job.
Yeah.
And especially in Canada, which is not a particularly big book market, like there are literally New York Times best-selling authors in this country who have multiple jobs and roommates because you can't make a living. You can't pay your bill. You pay your bills, buy your kids groceries. You can't do that on book sales, especially not in this country. So at the end of the day, whatever time you have around, working and your kids and other responsibilities, that time is best spent writing rather than trying to manage, 6 different social media feeds and accounts and stuff. So,
but to your credit, you have been doing very well, as River of Crows was a finalist in the 2023 Canadian Book Club Awards, which was announced this month. Was the winner announced? Yeah,
it was. The winner was announced in December. It was not my book, sadly.
That's okay, but congratulations. Like that in itself, that
Mm-hmm.
speaks volumes. Like, and that's what my next question was going to get to. Can you give us a quick synopsis of the first two books and then tell us what's coming out so we can give kind of the listeners an idea of what they can get out and start and buy and read, you know, especially people who are into reading in general, but if you're into fantasy, you know, like.
Yeah, this is I've heard some people call it epic fantasy. I don't think I would classify it as epic. I mean, it's epic in the sense that there is a very established magical system. There's a political system and a religious system sort of in this fantasy world. And there is sort of a well-defined history that sort of helps to explain what's happening in this magical world that they're in. But it's not as well, there's the cat.
Yeah, he always comes and says, pushing my mic
But it's
over.
not as heavy. I would use the term heavy as a lot of epic fantasies are. It's certainly not a difficult read, I wouldn't think. It's book one is River of Crows, and that's how the adventure starts off. The main character sort of meets his new friends and gets through to the magical world and starts on his big adventure. So he wants to get back home, basically, and he finds out that there are a lot of shocks to his system as he starts off on this adventure, and he realizes that his mother, who died when he was just a baby, had actually been from this world. And so that sort of sets off a whole new load of things he has to deal with while he's trying to help his friends rescue their families. So his friend Aislinn, who is the other sort of main character, she's trying to find her brother who's been kidnapped. He meets these three other kids in this forest on the way to find a sorcerer who they think can help them. And they're looking for their parents who have also been kidnapped. They've just disappeared and they don't know what's happened to them. But they're all trying to find their family. And it turns out that their family may have been kidnapped by this evil sorcerer. So they've decided they're going to go and rescue him. And that's sort of their big adventure in book one. In book two, there is a prophecy in this world. And in book one, you find out that this prophecy could equally fit Ty or Aislinn. And they're not really sure which one is the actual sort of chosen one who's going to save the world. And in book two, they overhear the grown-ups talking, and they hear about this mystical artifact that can tell people their destinies. So Ty is absolutely determined that he has to track this thing down and find his destiny. He has to know if he's the one who's destined to beat this evil sorcerer, because sort of at the end of book one, they had a showdown with him and it did not go well. So he's terrified in book two. And he learns something about his mother's death in book one that he's also struggling with in book two. So he really wants to know, does he have any chance of beating this bad guy? So they go off on this adventure to try and track down this artifact, and that takes them into a whole new set of dangerous magical struggles. And at the end of that book, that it ends on a cliffhanger.
Okay, good. And this is leading to what's coming out in May.
So book three starts basically right where that one left off. Cool. So there at the end of book two, I don't know, I can't really explain to you how that's spoilers.
No, that's what we want. We just wanted that's exactly what I wanted.
In book three, it picks up where they left off, and it goes into, there's a major showdown that happens in book three, and there's some major things that happens. There's some serious twists in this one, and it's sort of setting them up for the rest of the series. And it's going to really shake these kids up heading into book four.
Awesome. Yeah, that's we just wanted to give
awesome, he says. I'm just like, oh, please don't hit me, everyone.
No, this is great. And that's what we want. We want to help, promote. We want people like local authors support and everything like that. We have another question that's kind of not to do with your thing, and that's what we like to ask people. Do you have anything you want to share us interesting about yourself that's not your thing you're talking about today? Something.
Not book related. I love to garden. I just bought my first house just this past May, So just as gardening season was starting, so like the first thing I did before I did anything else was frantically dig some garden beds and just throw whatever plants I could get from a friend into there and hope they grew in time for the gardening season. So I'm
Are you a
really
flower
looking
gardener or a
forward to
vegetable gardener, or do you want to be both? Or
both. I do
Yeah?
both actually. So the people I bought it from had started sort of a little perennial garden. So I'm sort of, this fall, I split a bunch of the bigger ones and I've created a new garden out front and sort of expand those and expand my vegetable garden this year.
I find that probably could be very therapeutic, eh? If you do it right, it can be relaxing and or frustrating again, depending on the season.
Well, I'm just sort of starting and just learning here. So far, I've been very happy with it. I've had other gardeners who are much more jaded than I am say, wait until the squirrels discover it.
Nice.
So,
Well, yeah, it's
I
gonna be,
guess we'll see.
yeah. So I guess next would be where can we buy your books? Let's get it out there. So if people, I encourage you to check it out, and where can they get it?
You can get it at almost any online ebook store. So Kobo has it, Amazon has it, Apple has it. It is available in paperback in both Amazon and I think Chapters has the paperback in Canada. But I think the best bet in Canada would probably be Amazon for the paperback. Ebook is everywhere. You can also borrow them. Both of the first two books are both available through the Ottawa Public Library. Both paperback and ebook versions are available through the library. And if there's other places that you want it, there is a general book link on my website at nptrights.com. And if you go to the books page, there's there's books to read links that sort of have all of the places where they're available. I can't remember them all offhand, but there's a bunch.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for taking some time out on this evening to come and talk to us. And it's really exciting. Brendan and I are huge readers. We've been huge readers for our entire life. So it's always really cool to talk to somebody who builds those worlds. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's been very exciting being here.
Yeah, we're grateful to have you on, and thank you so much for being here. And everybody check out the books. And yeah, thank you so much for being on What's Your Thing.
Thanks.
So make sure to check us out, whatsyourthingpod.com. Check us out on Instagram, YouTube, follow us on TikTok. Check us out. We're going to have a blast. What's your thing?
What's your thing?